right, morning everyone, for a FHIR Work Group meeting, which I think is the first after the last Connectathon, which was September 1st to 2nd in Brisbane, which is a pretty amazing Connectathon actually. Went really, really well. What we're going to go through today is really a number of ballot reconciliation items now that ballot is closed. For the record, my name is Danielle Tavares-Rickson. I'm an AU FHIR Work Group co-chair. I'll be chairing the meeting today, and Dushika is taking the minutes for today's meeting. On our agenda, what is here is approval of minutes. However, because the minutes have really only come out a day and 3 hours ago, I think that we should postpone the approval of minutes to our next call. Are there any objections to postponing the approval of those minutes? Hearing none, we'll move that to the agenda of our next call. We'll then go through updates and then move into ballot reconciliation. There's quite a number of items, and I don't know what we'll get through today. These have been organised now in order really of, I think really the ability of people to attend around e-requesting to be up front. And then we've got some other items down below, and then we'll talk about the next meeting. So that is what is proposed for the agenda today. I'll open that up here to say, are there any adjustments we need to make to that agenda, including whether or not we need to take anything off, or if people would like to add something to today's meeting agenda?
I was just going to say those first two groups are e-requesting related. So if folks have to leave at noon, maybe we could just do that lot till noon and then do the last section after that.
Yep.
So that would be good. Yep. Cool.
All right. Any other suggested amendments, or I guess things to watch out for in terms of the agenda for our minutes today, for our meeting today? All right, so having already postponed the minutes, let's just do a quick run through of the ballot reconciliation status. So ballot is closed for all the specifications. All 4 active projects, which is base, core, and e-requesting and patient summary, have been going through a ballot cycle. For everything but patient summary, that's been ballot for working standard. Patient summary is a ballot for comment. Let's just do a quick run through of where this is at for the FHIR Work Group, because this group currently oversees all the active FHIR projects. So I'll just actually probably drop that link in the chat, where this is the main point for the ballot reconciliation area that has that current cycle, which has the pages for what is active. And on each of those pages, there are a set of relatively up-to-date information items that the co-chairs and the different facilitators for those projects keep up to date. But okay, so I'll just run through the projects relatively quickly. For base, and we are going to be talking about base reconciliation today because it's the FHIR Work Group that currently is responsible for AU base. We had actually some pretty good responses. So out of 56 voters, there was 33 affirmative, 16 negative, 1 abstain, and only 6 no votes, which brings us to a voting percentage of 89% of voters who registered to vote actually voted in the ballot. I think I haven't taken all the numbers and looked backwards, but that's actually really high. Higher than last time and the time before that. I don't know if it's an all-time high, but I actually think it might be. And that has led to, across that percentage, which we look at ballot pass fail, overall, it's sitting at a pass. I mean, we all know that means we still need to work through all the ballot reconciliation items, all the items of feedback that were voted on a ballot, but there is an in principle approval to publish from our consensus group with an affirmative of 67%. We have 18 JIRA issues in total for AU base. And we're going to work through some of those today. So that's AU base. I'll just do a really quick run through for the others. In terms of AU core, so AU core had 60 registered voters, so a couple more than base, with 38 affirmative, 12 negative, 1 abstain, and it was 9 who haven't voted. So that brings it to 86%, which is the highest for AU core that we've gotten. The overall pass rate being 76%, so there is an in-principle approval. There are 25 different issues to work through in terms of ballot reconciliation. For e-requesting, there are 59 eligible voters, 9 affirmative, 36 negative, 3 abstain, 11 no votes. I think that puts it at roughly, Michael Wilson, I think that was 81% of voters who voted, which was pretty
Yeah, it
good.
was about that. Yep.
At the moment, that means it's not passing, which means it'll work through its triage process and use the HL7AU process for withdrawal of votes to move the negative votes into affirmatives. Overall, it has 99 JIRA issues. That's par for the course, to be honest, for an R1 for ballot for working standard. That's pretty good. For patient summary, which is ballot for comment, so it's not working standard, this is an early set. There were 58 voters, 32 affirmative, 13 negative, 3 abstain, 10 no votes. So that's an 82% voted. Approval status is not applicable because it's not about publication, so doesn't matter. Overall, there are 33 different items of feedback that were voted on. There's quite a few number of other items that weren't voted on, and I think all of those anyway will be considered, given that it's at the ballot for comment stage rather than the ballot for working standard. And that's the rundown of the active projects and ballots at this time. Did anyone have any questions about those 4 projects they wanted to ask before we move on to the next topic? All right. Brett, did you want to make any comments about that as the balloting manager?
Oh, only it was good. We ran 4 ballots consecutively, which was concurrently rather. So that was good that we could do all that at once. And yep, I think the actual participation rate I think is way better than it has been in the past in terms of the voters that voted. I think overall we're down in total sign-ups, but we're looking at various reasons why that happened as well. But I think it, since most of the participants voted, I kind of don't mind. I really want active active participants. Yep, and other than that, I think everyone's just going to work through their reconciliation and we'll head out towards getting final publications together.
All right. So back to today's agenda then, I've run through the update. That brings us to ballot reconciliation. So at this point, there are a number of items to work through. I will note that these have been raised by you, Brett. So did you want to share your screen at this point and start working through those items?
I might do
All right.
that because then I can scroll around as needed. Let me share that. So, I might talk overall that those 3 tickets that are listed on for discussion in that first block, they're all related, coming from the so this is the new terminology content that we added in, which came from me requesting around communication request reason, and these 3 tickets are of similar nature, about how specific the language is and just for a general purpose code system. So I think we might just talk about the first one, but I think we kind of are probably looking at the principles of how these terms are defined, and so hopefully the second two are kind of more of the same. So yeah, to go through it, and it's probably worth, let's look at the actual content. Yeah. So the same as this here. So if we look at, so we've got our, it's big enough. We've got our three terms here related to communication request reason. It's used to populate the communication request reason element in e-requesting, and that's kind of its purpose. And there's three reasons listed, which were the ones that were initially supplied by e-requesting in for the ballot. So looking at so the first one I've got is to talk about is patient, the patient term. So the original wording is a patient's request about receiving communication from a service provider. And I think my issue is really including language that is actually content of the communication request itself and not necessarily the reason for the communication request. So in this case, the specific term of service provider is actually telling you about what the communication request is about. And so my suggestion was to so rather than sort of supporting these specific concepts in the term, is to move to a more generic concept, so it can be reused for other types of communication requests. So in this case, it's about kind of removing the service provider reference and turning it into something more generic. So the language would change from um, receiving communication from a service provider to a patient's request to receive communication in general, right? So, so it's just a softening of the language, and then it can be reused for other types of patient requested communication. And that's about it for that one. So I probably
So the
say,
essential
yeah,
change that's proposed is going from and it's still keeping the same code. It's the
yeah,
definition of the code and going from a patient's request about receiving communication from a service provider to a patient's request to receive communication, which may be from a service provider, may be from other entities. And the
yeah,
point is that it would be up to the FHIR resource that would indicate where this is coming from. Is that
yeah, or it may be that there's none supplied as part of a workflow pattern, right? That
okay?
where it's going to come from is not actually defined in the request. So yeah, so it's more just making the language um less specific and
And just for people
yeah.
on the line, can you confirm what the actual code and display is?
So
Because the
currently the
definition
code,
should match that.
yeah, so basically patient request is the code and
Okay.
display, which I kind of think is generic in nature. Patient and patient. We can argue about what it should be, but I think that's pretty generic. But then in the actual definition, it's got this more specific content. Yeah. So yeah, so the idea was to try and make it less less about what it was going to do and more about it because it's why. Basically it's a reason. So if patient request is the reason, that's actually the reason, and what it's going to do is defined by the communication request itself. Yeah.
All right, so then we'll go Michael and then
Yes.
Dushi.
I think mine's the same as Dushi's. But in the bottom of the issue, I've referenced an e-requesting ballot issue that's related.
Oh, yeah.
Dushi, was that the same as you were going to talk to? Because it's your issue.
Yes, that's what I was going to mention. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, which is a good point about whether we should have this term at all. So,
Okay,
yeah.
so do we want to go into that now? Do we want to, okay, hang on. Sorry, could you give us some more information, Michael Wilson, on if that issue is actually about a value set or is more about the code system, or what, can you give us more context for that?
I just wanted to highlight it. I mean, Dushi can probably talk to it better, but she's saying that patient carries the same meaning as an alternate code. So maybe we should be using that instead. I just noting it for consideration, right? So I'm not saying we have to do anything about it, just noting that that should form part of our conversation. And Dushi probably can talk to it better than I can.
So
Yeah.
before Dushi does,
Mhm.
just double checking. Is essentially your point, Michael, that in fact what might actually happen is removing this code from this code system because the downstream value set could use an alternate
Yeah.
code from a code system? Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
if we think it's equivalent in the like we're trying to generalize this concept here, and if that ends up being the same as that one, why would we have the same? So it's probably whether we think the way we're generalizing it is the same or not.
Okay. Okay. Now, sorry, with that context in place, Dushi, could you run us through it?
Yeah, I think Michael summarized it well. I was just questioning why we need to create a new code in AU base when there is already an existing code that I think in the context of communication request reason provides the same semantics. Like the new code in AU base, even with the updated description, doesn't provide any additional semantics in my view to what's already in there in the existing code. So with that in mind, I'm just questioning why don't we use the existing act reason code rather than creating a new one.
Okay, Andy?
So the reason for this request is actually to suppress communication from the provider to the patient. That's the real reason why we have it in the requesting. I guess listening to the discussion, it seems redundant to, in the reason, include anything that's trying to redefine or define a requester or recipient or sender, because they're already defined in there anyway. So I think the reason code should actually sit with why we're actually creating this communication request, not how or the logistics of it. And in this case, it really was there to, as I say, suppress communication. So it's not actually a communication request at all in the common use. It's actually exactly the opposite.
Yeah.
And Andy, did it
specific.
cover both? I know that was the primary case, but was it a preference for like email or SMS? If they did want communication, it would be their preferred communication mechanism.
It did, but
yeah. But that wasn't the primary reason. Yeah.
No, the original reason is that there are a number of patients and practices that do not want direct communication from a service provider to the patient. So yes, the actual requester could be the patient, or it could be the practitioner or an organization. So that all kind of works out. But again, I think obviously in the communication request binding in the general resource, there's no guidance whatsoever. It's just an example. So I think I guess I struggle with generalizing this, because I don't think the communication request use is actually a general use. It's actually quite a specific use in the context of a diagnostic request, which is bound to the business model of diagnostic requesting.
But okay, but it's patient. The why is it's patient requested, and the fact that it's a suppression and what you are suppressing is all defined in the actual request.
It is, but this is supposed to be the reason, and the primary reason was very much a business reason for why this was being done, and that's why I guess I think we're kind of on a road to nowhere by trying to generalize this.
Yeah, the problem is
as
I'll have the same issue with the GP system and about some other communication, and I'll need a different code because it says it's specific.
Yep.
And I don't
Actually, I would
think that's of
dispute
value.
that. The GP system would also be a service provider. So
Oh, okay,
this
okay.
would
It
still,
assumes that the communication is associated with a service request, which it's not necessarily so.
it actually
So it might be
doesn't. The
it does. It says
definition that we
service
are
provider.
currently yes, but a service provider doesn't always have to have a request in play. That is a particular workflow. As you pointed out around GP systems, they're still service providers, whether or not there's any kind of request in play. So
Okay.
I
Okay. So
think that is.
say it's a communication that has nothing to do with the service provider. It's a reminder that's coming from
Well, how about I throw out another
the
one?
third-party
The
system, right?
business, the model for supporting ambulance call outs and information exchanges in the NHS uses communication request to go from the what do they call them? The people who are answering the emergency calls and going out to the operators and all that kind of thing also gets modeled all of that information through communication requests. I agree, it's a fairly widely applicable resource.
Yeah.
I'm just not sure what the value add is
Yes.
in this case, and obviously it's optional in the original kind of base FHIR spec, and I think if we have no inherent value in it, because see what we use it for when you're implementing, you use it because it's a handy kind of let's just kind of branch off what that reason was, and then we'll make a choice from there. So if you've got 5 different communication requests,
I've got
then
yeah, I've got other tickets on the other spec for that.
Can I
It's
just query
but
here for
yeah.
Andy? Which part of the definition for you is answering the reason portion? Because what I'm hearing from you isn't the fact that it's really about service provider like doing it. Which part of the current definition is the key bit that you want to retain because it's the reason?
well, I'm really arguing that the reason is maybe not accurately captured, but the reason is the allowing for the suppression of SMSs or communication directly to the patient. That was the business reason why this communication request was originally included, to both suppress or direct it in the context of a diagnostic request.
But I just
And
want
is
to
it
go
important, sorry, Brett, and is it
go on.
important in that context that those are directly coming from the patient, or is it just more about the suppression regardless of where that's coming from?
It's not always coming from the patient.
Okay.
Oh, well, that's not what it says it says the patient's requested. So
I
yeah,
think we might need to do
yeah.
I would suggest that there might need to be some work offline to consider an appropriate code for that because with the code being like patient and the display having patient and the definition, I think that is really embedding it to being the patient
requested.
being the specific agent requesting what's happening.
Yeah, because I was also considering, say, because it was also like the actual communication can be, the recipient can be someone else. So how does the patient request that you do or don't send something to someone else? And things like that. So like it's more just a generalizable pattern that you can say the patient has requested this communication, whatever it says, or not. Do
Well,
not get this. Yeah.
given an e-requesting, we allow for the requester to be a practitioner role or an organisation or a patient. We're kind of allowing for all of those options. So it is about the requesting that the patient not be receiving these or receiving it with a particular pathway.
Yeah, but say you wanted to say, I want my parents not to receive this, or I want my spouse to receive this via email.
We don't do that currently in e-requesting.
Yeah, but you can in eBase, right? So
you could, but that's
more,
why I'm arguing that with
yeah.
I think in generalizing it, where we're then kind of transforming the intent of what the original value set was for. And that there I would worry that we would end up creating more work for implementers to then distinguish the direction that that communication request is providing.
I think it just opens up, we need a code for everything that you do, right? And like, I don't think the reason why a communication request is defining what the request is. So I don't know why you're leveraging reason as being a way to define like the whole request.
What's the reason for
I
the
kind
whole
of
request?
It creates like a, if you've got a generalized workflow engine, it gets difficult because you've got now a bunch of multiplicity of codes for specific reasons. And so rather than just being, this is what we're doing defined and this is the reason.
So can we come back to the
Yeah.
original proposal? What's currently defined is that there's a request from a patient. Oh no, from a patient
request
about comms from a service provider. Those two are embedded in the definition right now. Although it is sounding to me that is too specific, Andy, for what you are intending to use this code for, that it doesn't have to be or shouldn't be the request specifically is from a patient, and it always has to be from a service provider where that communication is coming from, although I think that suits the e-requesting.
And even my language here, I've assumed it's about receiving the communication because it's about not receiving the communication as well. So to me, it's almost just more like what Dushi's suggested term. It's patient requested. That's it. Because that's a very generic.
I don't know why we'd bother having one if it was just a code to say patient requested, given we already know if a communication request is patient. That's not the reason for why you're creating this communication request. The reason is patient requested. The reason is, what was the communication request actually trying to achieve?
And my concern is, from what you've articulated, Andy, which I didn't have this coming into this meeting, is that the current definition doesn't talk about suppression at all. I'm suggesting that I think there should be a rewording of this to be clear about the intent that is trying to be achieved through e-requesting.
I think it's all the original wordings. It's about receiving communication, so I guess not receiving it is about it. But it's it's almost like I'm going, what is the value at all of having this reason? Because it's like it's if you don't care, why it exists is the patient doesn't want it, right? Or the patient does want it a certain way.
Well, that's why I think creating this in a general sense, I would say that EUBase doesn't. I don't know if it has any value add in this. Whereas the e-requesting context, there is a very specific reason why we use it. And I agree that the language that's in there is not necessarily as accurate as it could be. But I struggle to take this out of the context of you requesting and generalize it, because I think as soon as you generalize it, it kind of becomes redundant in some ways.
Okay, let's go to Angus and then Michael Wilson.
Yeah, I thought this was being put in for the problem that I kind of face today, which is trying to identify what any one communication request means to me. Like at the moment, I get the sort of list of communication requests that I have, and I'm trying to determine, is this telling me not to SMS the patient? Is this telling me to send a copy to? There's about 3 or 4 different communication requests, and I'm trying to inspect them to go, what am I doing with this one? And today I do that by looking at, like, I'm kind of looking at many things, trying to deduce, is the recipient a patient? Does the do not perform set to true? I assume this is a do not SMS the patient one. And in a way, it's a bit like the profile, like we've profiled the communication request to do that. And maybe I could look at the profile element, but I don't believe that's mandatory to have, right? So, as a developer, it'd be really nice if I could look at the communication request and say, if that code says do not SMS patient, then I know what this is for. And at the moment, I'm kind of like inspecting it, trying to deduce what it is, where I thought this was giving me something which, like, I can look at the reason code and if it says patient, I know what this is. Maybe that's a shortcut. And can I just add one thing that I thought the discussion why we're bringing it here is because this pattern occurs in more places than communication requests. We have the tasks, for instance, we have different profiled via tasks, and we've put tags on them to say, almost classing them, that this is this class of resource and that is this class of resource. And again, it's that problem from the developer's point of view of, like, there could be many types of these, which one is it? And maybe it's a shortcut I'm not allowed to have, which is a very simple property to say, it's this profiled type, and this was kind of doing this with communication requests. It was like a way of classing, going, it's this one, not that one. If that helps at all, but that's why I thought we were
2 questions for this. So if it just identifies that it's a patient request from you, Angus, that's enough when set in the rest of the context?
If I look at what I do today, where I don't have this property with our current prod implementation, is I look at the recipient reference, and if it's to a patient resource and the communication request do not perform value is true, then I conclude that this is a do not SMS the patient communication request, and I act accordingly. So it's kind of like I'm looking at those things, whereas if I had this property, maybe I just look at the reason and go, I know what this is, go forth,
One of the reasons I'm asking is because currently the code, whether it's in eRec or base, is neutral. It might mean do it, it might mean not do it. What it does qualify is that this is coming from a patient, is this request. And so I'm wondering, does this code address the need that you're describing?
I actually look today, I look at the recipient, not the, what's the term for not the person it's going to, but the person who requested it, the requester. I don't look at the requester being the patient. I look at the recipient.
Yes.
Because and even that's short-sighted, right? Because I know in eRec that if I get a communication request and it's pointing at the patient, I can assume this is the profile do not SMS. In the future, we might have another communication request that points to the patient that means something completely different, and my logic falls down, right? Because now I have to, like, split between those two.
Which is probably where I was going.
This is the generalized problem I felt we were trying to bring.
With, like, because I think Andy has articulated a use case and a set of reasons to have this concept, and you've articulated your use case. I'm not sure how well this one code is actually addressing how you'd like to move forwards in what you described. If I could just go look at that code, that would tell me those things, and I'm not so sure that it's doing
well,
that.
I think Andy's arguing that if this code is an EREC code, then in EREC we wouldn't reuse this code for a different purpose. Therefore, I can just look at this code and deduce that this is this profiled communication request. Whereas if you generalize that code into like anyone can use this code in any other profile, now at our level, I don't know really what it means.
Okay.
We're specifically
maybe hand
using
over
EREC.
to Michael Wilson for his point and comment, because I thought I saw in the chat that this code is used for both positive and negative cases of send me things this way and then don't send me things.
Well,
so
that's what's in the chat. So I put in the chat the description of the e-requesting patient communication request profile. So that's the description. But on Angus's point, I think the reason we have this reason code is so you can identify it's this type of communication request. It's for this profile for this purpose, right? Which is the description. And so without this, we kind of don't know what it's for, like which communication request is it? You have to use logic like Angus has got, check this and that, and this combination of these things means that's what I need to do with it.
It means you have to identify, like you have identified pathways that you accept, right? But that's not all the pathways that could exist. And you should check the elements anyway to see what it means, right?
But you can't. You can't necessarily deduce it just from the data. You can't allow. We couldn't allow, for instance, an arbitrary set of communication requests because we wouldn't know what to do with them, even if we got them. So
they have to pass the profile. And if it's a work, is it a workflow reason? Is that what it is?
If you took this away, I'd be like, well, can I have a tag then? Can we put a tag on communication request that says do not SMS patient tag? So that I can just look at that and go, oh, I know what this is. I know what to do, rather than me having to do this complex process of looking at many things, trying to conclude what is this communication request about. I mean, that's what I'm.
But don't you have to read what it says anyway to make sure it's valid?
Okay. Can we? Okay. So
once I know what it is, Brett, I then read the properties to do the appropriate thing. But that first task of working out what is the meta thing for this communication request? Like, what's it? I know from the profiles there are like 5 different types. Which one is it?
If I'm putting my profiling hat on, if it passes the profile, that's what it is.
Yeah, but how do I know it passes which profile? It might pass
your
5 profiles.
Well, it should. They're not distinguishable then, and they're the same thing.
But this is the problem.
The profiles should be distinct unless they're overlapping, and then they're both, right?
But we could have 2 profiles that have 2 different meanings, contexts, but many of their values are the same. And so I'm trying to split the 2.
It needs to be distinguishable. You should have unless they're actually the same things, they should be distinguishable.
So
I'm going to have to chair here and put a question on whether or not we actually need to take this offline, or whether and then come back, or whether we noting that I think the conversation is really quite moved. The suggestion from Brett doesn't really materially change whether it does suppression or not suppression. None of those things are actually in the description of the concept. So your usage, I think, still stays true. However, if there is, I think, some work to be done on having a discrete concept or set of concepts that are unambiguous in how they work in the workflow, rather than relying on the profile-specific implementation guidance in the profile, then I think that needs to be taken offline out of this meeting with a set of actions to work through that.
Yeah, because if the reason why is that I want to make it easy to process, like this is a tag so I can implement a workflow. That's not like I can put lots of reasons for communication requests in, like, but it's overlapping the business requirement and the workflow processing.
So it's not that I'm against your point here about why we're using this reason code I can understand why you're saying this is, you need to generalize it, but that takes away the purpose we had it for. And then so the bigger question is, how do we solve the problem we were trying to solve with this? Yeah, sure, take it away because of your reason. Now I'm left with the problem I originally had. How do I class resources into their profiles?
I will just question, which is one of the reasons I was asking. This code does 3 things. This code says, this thing says it's a patient's request. Can't come from anyone else. It's about a patient requesting things about communication. And the communication is from a service provider. Could be a GP, could be in the e-requesting workflow. None of those things matter. Those are the 3 things that definition does, no more, no less. I feel like the discussion has been around other things. And so I'm a little bit unclear on how to chair this to a decision.
Yeah, because I'm looking at it more like why is this communication? Why does this communication request exist? And there's lots of reasons, right? It might be clinical, might be other things, right? Preferences, okay. And it's but if I want to know what, like, basically it's like saying what profile. If it's meant to say what profile it is, then why not just make the mandatory and then just look at that?
Well, is that the answer? Does people agree with that? Like that, this is the conversation I felt we should have been having. Like, if that's the answer, fine, let's do that.
You have to take that to the e-requesting group, because it doesn't change what the code definition is in the code system, right? That's not what the terminology does.
Yeah, I think there's some tickets in e-requesting too saying do away with this whole thing, right? So it's because when I say why, I want to know, why does this communication request exist? And like, if patients requested it, that's a reason why. If the doctor wants it, that's another reason why. And
but I consuming this, like, what I'm trying to do is work out which of the profiles this communication request matches, and then I know how to go forth. And I look at all the data to do what I need to do, but the initial question is which one is it? And I will say we've kind of got a precedence, rightly or wrongly, in the task profiles, right? We've put tags to say this is a child task, this is a group task, and that's doing the same purpose, right? We could solve my problem here by putting tags on the communication request to tell me which type they are. But that would be another way to solve it.
We resorted to that because we had nothing else, whereas here we do have something else. And if we're not going to use it to represent that reason, I mean, in theory, you could just have an arbitrary piece of narrative in there and have some long-winded description of, yes, this is what it was for, which is all very interesting, but that's not very useful in implementations at all.
So I think we're going to have to stop this discussion in the interest of time. We'll go to Michael Wilson, and then we'll need an action to go away and asynchronously, I think, look at this item and move it to the next meeting agenda or the one after, because I don't think this is getting solved today. Our conversations are going around in circles.
And the other 2 in this block are the same issues. Yeah.
They might not. It really depends on their usage. We'll bring them up, and if it seems like they are subject to the same concerns, then we'll bundle those into the same action.
Cool.
So
it feels like it's another issue. Like, we've identified, like, this is a red herring, right? Like, I agree with the comments here, but we're not agreeing on the use case of this property, right?
Yeah,
we almost need another issue that says, in my view, is like, how do we class common resources? How do we know which profile they are?
Okay.
And then if you can solve that problem, then I don't care if you take this away from us, because we now don't need this because you've given me another solution to the problem.
Yeah.
Can we make sure we really capture that in the minutes, Dushi, so that we have the I guess the issues that are really important to the use case, that this code was a part of the solution that we're looking to address, so that we can come back on that. Thank you. And Michael?
Yeah, that was going to be my suggestion, is that we move on to the other two and just look at whether they're the same issue or different. And I'd suggest we look at urgent first, which you just brought up, because there's a related e-requesting ballot issue on that one as well. And just in the context, let's not get caught up on the wording of the code, but at what it's used for, and whether what it's the same as what we just looked at.
Yeah, because I think, like, again, this is, so again, it's like a specific language, and,
So just to confirm, can you go to the
Yep.
top so we can see this is the next issue?
It's the next issue, and we'll look at the original.
It's communication request reason. Yep, thank you.
Yeah.
That's the existing copied out from e-requesting and into AU base. I mean, it's just a move of a code system.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
So, and so, and like, I made a suggestion, but this was for an argument more than anything. So it's, so what did I say? It was the word results. Because that implies what the communication is about. Okay, so it's a specifically attached to a results communication, and I get in your case it is, right, in e-requesting. So again, it was about just removing what was being communicated to not include the word results. So it's just about the communication. Request for urgency, and I think the other ticket goes into that too. I mean, there is a flag to say it's urgent already, which actually makes it urgent, right? So in some ways I'm going, why are you restating the fact that it's urgent? But that's not what this ticket says. And it was also, and I think it said nominated recipient, and I didn't think you needed to say nominated, because it's just to recipients in general too, because it's actually not just one, technically, because it's open to multiple in the communication request resource. So that was more just qualifying the language differently, right?
So just before we go to Michael Wilson, in terms of context for people who are looking at this, in terms of the code definition, there's code, display, and definition, and it's not on the screen. But what is the code for this?
Urgent.
Just urgent. Okay.
Just urgent. Yeah.
Okay. So the code is currently urgent. The display is currently urgent results, and your suggestion is that it moves to urgent request.
Yeah, the general.
And change the definition from urgent results to urgent request.
For comms, yeah.
Okay. And now, Michael, your hand is up.
Brett, I just wanted to highlight the point you've raised in there about you suggesting that the results should be described in the communication request category. So does that apply to the other situations as well, that we should be using category instead to more talk about the type of communication we want?
Yeah, because that's the type of communication you're requesting. It's the category of communication. I've got tickets on on the requesting as well to add results specifically or reporting as a specific category, because that's what you're asking for. Because then it's distinguishable, right? It's actually defining the whole communication request and what it is about and who's it to and who's it from and how urgent is it.
Does that, in our patient one, does category apply to the patient one we previously talked about?
It would, because what are you communicating to them?
I think we're using it. Are we using SMS for category? Is that
what do you send them though? Not how.
Well, that's where I think it's varied. We have multiple, because it could be a booking, it could be a reminder, it could be.
Just specify what the comms are that you are requesting.
Which I think we do have.
Yeah. So that was the premise of my other tickets and requesting. So it's about saying what in category, who, receiving recipient, Like, so it's completely defined. So I can drop it in a workflow engine, in a, a communications request engine, and I could work out what to do. I don't need to rely on reason.
I was going to say we would go to Angus first.
Yeah.
Do you still want your hands down, Angus?
I'll put it back up.
Okay,
Yeah.
so we'll go Angus, Dushi,
Okay.
and then I'm going to ask the question of, is this in the same category as the other one and we need to take it offline?
Different.
So go first, please, Angus.
And I was going to say, it is, in my view, it is the same category. So I agree with all the comments you've said here, but I'm still left with the same problem. And you just talked about like a generic workflow engine. That's kind of the point, right? Like a generic workflow engine can't know how to class them. Like even if it looks at properties, tomorrow a new type of communication request that has the same pattern of properties, but some other one, and now my workflow engine can't split them.
No, but you say what, and it means something in your business. You say who, it means how do you find them and direct it. How, SMS or email or other, right? So it's completely mappable because it's what, who.
It's not that simple. Like we profile.
So what's if there's something in there that's different, that's an issue for the communication request. You need to differentiate.
We're going to move to Dushi really quickly because Angus has already flagged
it's the same
as the other one.
I agree.
And needs more content. So Dushi?
Yeah, I was just going to ask, there's a communication request priority as well in the communications request, which is currently mandatory in e-requesting, and that's set to urgent. So I'm just not clear about the difference and why use the reason code of urgent when there is a priority that means that communicates how urgently this communication is to happen or to be carried out.
Have you provided that comment in the Jira
Yes.
issue, Dushi?
Yes.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah, and that's part of it too, because like it's just like summarizing some of the things in the communication request definition, so it's easy to pick up and know what to do, right? And that's, you've got an exact usage that you've defined in that term, but it's not general, right? So and that's the whole thing, right? So it's assuming a certain workflow.
So let's stop there. This gets bundled up into the other one. Let's quickly move on to the third one to see if that is of the same kind of nature.
Similar.
Same again.
Similar. Yeah, and I almost ticketed why do we need these codes at all, because it says it in the communication request, right? And I think there are some e-requesting tickets a bit like that. It's so like, because this is basically saying the provider wants to do this, right? Or so it's like,
I think I probably have a point of order here that there's a remit that is currently sitting with this group around ensuring that the concept definitions are clear, right, and modeled appropriately. It's not for this group, though I realize we're discussing it, to dictate to the e-requesting group how they are modeling out profiles and the elements they use. We do need to make sure that we're not verging into that. Obviously, it can be a related discussion that helps form the intended usage of the codes, but that's not actually what we're deciding here. What needs to be discussed is having well-formed like codes, displays, definitions within a reasonable container of like communication request reason that all of this lines up, that can then be used by IGs as they need to. So we just need to be, I think we're starting to verge into some discussions that might feed in, but they're not actually the subject that we would vote on in this group.
That'll happen at a different TDG meeting. So I was just looking at copy to a request for results to be copied to an additional recipient, and again, the suggestion is to remove the results part from that, because that's what the communication.
Can I use this as an example of what I was trying to get at? If you could go back to the previous screen. This one. So it may not be up to this group to decide whether or not it is actually useful to have let's have something that's specifically about copying results. Maybe people want to copy to other things. What this group may consider is the fact that the code and display is generic, but the definition scopes it down to results, means that it's a poor concept definition. If we actually really want to do copy to results, then let's keep that. And the display and the code should therefore allow additional codes to be added for other use cases that want to copy to other things. So that would be the kind of discussion that would be appropriate for this group. But the do we need a really specific code and let's make sure we have one has to sit within e-requesting, and they get to make that decision.
Because we're going to be
delineation.
Yeah, like I kind of that's understandable to me, but the we are in AU based doing generic reasons, right? And like these are specific ones.
No, we are not just doing generic reasons. AU base at the moment is holding almost all of the HL7AU terminology. A bunch of those are specific. Sure. As long as they are well formed in such a way that we can build out robust terminologies, they can be as specific as they want. That there's no issue with having specific terminology, as long as it, I mean, for the reasons I was saying about copy to, if there are other kinds of copy to, having the generic copy to code and display taken up for one specific case is a bit of a problem in a modeling sense. But that would be my only issue. It's just pure good terminology modeling that allows for other use cases to build out terminology for Australia. Michael, your hand is up.
Yeah, I think I'm just agreeing with your comment there, because if you generalize these and then e-requesting decides they're no longer fit for purpose for us, we'll then have to come back and request, can you give us a more specific one because this one's too generic. So I think we do, your point there about, you know what, we're using the code copy to, and maybe that needs to change to have copy to results or something like that, so that it is specific and we actually more generalize and we more specific, make it more specific to fit our purpose. But if we need specific, that we need the AU base to be able to support our specific codes we need.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, like, because I can, like, yeah, as long as the concept, I'm happy if the concept's defined as a specific thing. But then, like, the only problems I have is then people go and use it for other stuff. Like, and that's why I got to worry about that too, right? And yeah, so, but it's like especially like urgent, right? I'm going to look at urgent, and everyone's going to go urgent results. Oh, it's just urgent. I'm going to use that.
That's a classic case of what we're talking about. That the definition is about urgent results, and the display is urgent results. And I think your concern is valid from a terminology modeling sense. I don't think it is up to us to gatekeep whether or not there should be a specific concept about urgent results. It's up to us to make sure that we have appropriate terminology modeling that can be used for Australia.
Yeah, okay, I'm happy with that. So let's go away and put more specific code and display terms in if we need to. Some of them don't.
We just put EREC in front of every code.
You don't have to, though. It's the fact that the code would be urgent results. EREC doesn't actually help because it's okay. I realize that was probably a facetious statement.
Special domain.
But sadly, normatively, that's not going to help.
No, that's okay, because then the next thing I'll do is I'll raise some tickets saying we should have a parent concept. Right.
And that's fine.
The problem is that the difficulty I have it ends up being multi-axial as well, so it's not a pure hierarchy anymore, and like we have to deal with that, right? So it's so because it's mixing urgency and what it is, right?
Okay, I'm kind of stepping out of my chair.
So it's a terminology problem.
This is a code system for reason. Reason is multi-axial. It always is in the real world.
Well,
there's no getting away. You can't have a pure hierarchy.
You could separate the concepts though and have two codes. Like this is the other. I've talked about that too.
No, I mean I agree you can, but let's move forwards to say there's an action. Can you meet Brett with I think it's really just the e-requesting co-chairs, Michael Wilson, Andy, Angus.
I can prep some suggestions and then I
We've-
can forward them on, and you can
we've-
we can
We've
meet.
obviously said urgent results because we're putting that on order, and people would assume it's an urgent order when what we mean is no, the result is urgent, which is why.
And the
we're saying
results
urgent.
don't exist yet.
Yeah, but yeah, if I was
Which is
abstracting,
valid.
I'd
My
just go
only
the
concern
fulfillment,
is the code just says
the
urgent.
communication on the fulfillment of the task is urgent. I had longer wording originally that said stuff like that, but so it's yeah, it's yeah, but if you want to have specific ones, I mean, yeah, we'll just make them very specific on what it is and what it's doing, and we'll just go with it.
I
It's
think
that
that is the
maturity
meeting
level.
to have to bring that
Yeah,
back to this group.
yeah.
There's
So if
nothing
I take an
that
action,
I heard, although please confirm that, Brett, in your estimation, that was the request from e-requesting, that would be inappropriate to communicate through terminology. It's just making sure that what gets published is the, appropriate representation.
yeah, it's more like what are we doing question than necessarily what the terms are, right? So it's yeah. So I think that's fine. I'm happy with that answer, like that we'll have specific concepts for specific things. And if I take an action to draft up some more specific code definitions, and I'll probably keep the wording of the definition, and just look at the display, and then I can organize a meeting with for e-requesting work group just to look at it, and then we can come back and dispose of it as being acceptable, and I'll be good.
All right, I think that's good.
Cool.
Does that work for you, Angus and Michael Wilson?
Yep, I think that's a valid next step.
Cool. And hopefully it's a short meeting and just go, what I suggest is okay.
Everyone who has a good idea or thinks they have a good idea indeed hopes it's a short meeting. You put it forward and everyone else goes, oh my God, why didn't we do this before?
we hope it's a short meeting. Yep.
All right.
All right.
So
that's
if
good.
that's the first 3 items, can we just double check some of the others as well? Because I think there's another set that was e-requesting. Are these of a similar nature?
It's more complicated, let's say. Just to make. Yeah.
All right.
I have. Yeah. There's an aspect of it that I have a problem with, but we can talk about it.
Sorry, was that you, Michael, or Angus, who was just commenting on that?
I just need some context what the others were to know whether they're the same. I didn't think.
Yeah.
I thought those 3 stood alone as the same.
I'll share my screen. So there was,
Yeah.
which I think we started with what I think were the more complex ones. Then there's a set on task business status.
This is actually different. There's some different questions. There's some wording questions in here too, which I think we can probably apply the same logic, and I might prep that. There's one there about rewording. Actually, 2 sets of rewording. So if I assume we're going to go down the same path, that's fine. But I have a different problem with the content of the code system.
Looking at the time frame, I would suggest we don't start with these now. That you might want to socialize those as part of the meeting that you would have with the e-requesting co-chairs here, and we might move on to these ones.
The last one in that set is the problem one, and we'll probably have to talk about it. The first 2 are rewording suggestions, and I can apply the same logic as we have for the first 3 and present that back, and hopefully we get rid of those ones quickly too. Cool.
I saw the next set of 3 is different because my issue was about classing resources, and that's the first 3. The next 3 were not, in my view, I didn't have the classing problem.
Okay.
Because we already solved that problem with tags.
Yeah, but I think my issues with the language are again generalizing stuff, and like I don't need if I can have specific terms and they're specific to you, that's okay. And then
we're coming at it from different angles. You've got issues with the language you're using, and I agree with those, but by changing them, you take my classing solution away. So
that's right. Yeah. Anyway, so I might use that meeting to walk through my biggest problem with that set with you as well. Just to maybe we can come to an
Okay.
answer, and I can be happy when
Sounds
we
good.
arrive to the next meeting. Yep. Cool.
That would be good, because I mean, I think in principle, what I'd articulated about having good terminology modeling will hold true. I haven't looked at the task business status one, so I can't actually say that I think there are any of the similar issues, but I think we still have a incumbent requirement around, good modeling that allows these to be added to in future.
Yeah.
I think there he has good modeling points, and then they add more layers of complexities by being good modeling.
Yeah. All right, so we're going to not open those
Do
three.
a job.
We're going to go to the next two.
Yep.
We've got 20 minutes roughly
Yeah.
for the rest of this call. I think we can actually get through one or two of the following items. Now, I think, is Ruben
I
back?
thought the bottom one's easy, I think.
You want to? All right, let's do that one.
Yeah, that one I
Actually,
reckon we can do,
this one's
because we
raised by
talked about it
you,
already.
isn't it?
Yeah,
All
it
right,
is.
I'm going to
And
stop sharing screen. Can you share screen and just like do the walkthrough and navigate that one?
do that. All right. So we've got, yeah, so this one is, and we actually talked about this at the last meeting in a different context as to what we're going to do with the examples. But we have the results copies to extension, which was an FMM1 extension in AU base, and it is in use now, is my understanding, right?
True.
So
But the new communication request of copy twos is the newer way to do it.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, so it was a useful extension to have on service request, but yeah, it has been solved already another way, a better way,
Agreed.
let's say.
Agreed.
Yeah, so in that sense, we are not really recommending using this approach any longer.
We
Yeah.
deprecate it somehow.
We deprecate it somehow by deprecating it, as the ticket says. So in the ticket, we've got, it's not, so it's basically, and this is just to test this is true, whether it's definitely not preferred, perhaps. But when we say no longer required, we mean we would deprecate it and hold it in deprecated state until we decide to remove it entirely, which is based on people indicating that there's no use anymore. So because it's been published before we go through this process as an FMM1, we have to maintain it basically until we are confident that we can remove it. So basically, I got really on my high horse here. It's misleading content now. And so it must have been, I was probably yeah, I don't know when I probably did this late at night. I was in the role of being complaining. Yeah.
Say the more correct. We just need to point to the new one and say.
Yeah. So I think so it's basically
in summary,
the premise is, in summary, we would want to deprecate this extension and all the changes that come with it. So basically
I deprecate this extension and all the changes that come with it. What is the and all the changes that come with it?
Okay.
Or are you meaning the actions associated with deprecation?
Yeah, actions.
Okay.
Yes, actions. Yes.
Yeah.
So it's basically there's in the resolution here, there's some principles that we can agree to or not. So it's basically okay, so it's recommended. What did I say? It's not recommended to apply this artifact for future implementation of this concept. So basically, we have other ways to do what this extension is saying. We should supply guidance that the communication request is the preferred method to do this to represent copy to, and that we mark the alpha extension as deprecated with a note explaining that. And all the examples of use of the extension in a base will be removed which we did talk about at the last meeting about as a consequence of deprecating.
Mhm.
So that means it's still published in R6 and into the future until it's decided it won't be published any longer in the deprecated state. But that's a different decision. So we don't have an automatic removal at any point. So I think we did talk about it last meeting. There was a number of things minuted that, you know, people didn't want it
All right.
removed. Examples were available in previous versions. Yeah.
Thanks, Brett. Are there any comments or questions on that suggestion?
I 100% agree. We got the three biggest path labs are using it. So that's the problem. But I agree with everything Brett said.
Yeah, it's okay. So it'll just be still available in the
All right.
package and usable. Yeah.
If there are no comments or questions, I think we can entertain a motion. Would you like to make a motion, Brett?
I would like to make a motion that we deprecate copies to extension, a result copies to extension to in our base, and take the actions in the resolution here to clean up and present it nicely.
So essentially that this change request is persuasive with modification with the disposition or the resolution that is on screen.
Yes, please.
All right. Who would like to second that?
I'll second it.
Okay. Any other comments or questions while I move to the poll? All right. Not hearing any. I'm launching an electronic poll. You should see that in front of you. Please vote affirmative, negative, or abstain for the current motion. If you can't see it, or rather, if you can see it but you can't actually vote, can you pop it in the chat what your vote is? And if you can't see it because you've dialed in, you can say your name and affirmative, negative, or abstain. And I'm going to count that down in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I will end that poll. I will share the results. So with the vote in the chat, that makes 10 affirmative, 0 negative, 2 abstain. The motion carries. We have passed that and will carry out the actions that are described in this JIRA. Thank you.
Well, that was easier.
It was easy. It's too easy.
All right.
Do you want to move to the next one? We might not get through
yeah.
this, but I think it is worth spending 10 minutes on it, especially because Ruben has joined us, so we can actually talk about it.
Oh, that's good. Maybe Ruben can.
Maybe Ruben can preface this one.
Yeah.
Sorry, are we talking about the
This
tracker
one.
item I proposed? Yes.
Yes.
Okay, sure. All right. Well, I should start by saying I'm speaking in my personal capacity at this moment, noting, of course, that the agency has also supported this comment. Look, in essence, and actually, having thought about this following Brett's comment, there is one concession that I am willing to make compared to what I said in the description of this issue. But for those not aware of what the issue is, in essence, this is trying to better adopt the source attribute of RSG as we've adopted it in AU base. The source attribute is a means of referencing the source of the RSG value when it's not a document. So we have source document, which is for things like birth certificate, citizen certificate, etc. Source is for things other than that, other than a document. So it could potentially be a system like the HI service, for example. So what I'm calling for in this is to create a code system and value set with some well-known sources in our digital health landscape where these values are known to occur, so that we can standardize the representation of those sources when adopting RSG in the various places we've adopted it. And I don't actually, just in relation to my previous statement, I don't think I actually said what kind of binding I was looking for here. And I think in the interests of this being fairly new and recent, I'm quite happy to make this a preferred binding, if that's the general consensus. I would prefer extensible, just so that if people are getting these values from these places, they will use these values. So that's really the essence of it. I'm happy to take questions.
Sorry, unmute. While I have my hand up, because I have a comment on this. If there's anyone else who has any other questions or comments, please go first because I'm chair, so I should go last. I was just excited that the raise hand function worked. It usually doesn't when you're chairing in Zoom. So anyway, oh, we do have one. Okay, so in order, it looks like Rachel.
Thank you. Yeah, my hand worked too. Yeah, look, I just on this, Ruben, just putting on my Provider Connect Australia hat, we would not be a source for recorded sex or gender. We would reflect the source of the recorded sex or gender as received from the HI service for practitioners. So
Right.
you can remove, we would not be a candidate for that value set. We would want the HI service to be a value in that value set.
Thanks for that clarification, Rachel. And yes, you're spot on there. So I'd accept that friendly amendment if we get to motioning.
Yep.
What other sources do you have in mind, Ruben? So HI
can you scroll up?
It's in the tracker item. So the ones
go.
I've stated are the HI service, APRA, and Medicare.
So it's like original sources, right? But
Although,
sorry, go on.
No, I was going to say, is it really Medicare or is it Services Australia?
Well, so I like to
parts of it,
think of
yeah.
Medicare as a service provided by Services Australia amongst the many services they provide, including Centrelink and other things.
All right.
Yeah, I can't raise my hand, so I don't know.
Yeah, see, I could,
want
and
to.
I'm shocked because I'm actually the host, but
Yeah, I can't find
that usually never works. Okay, so Brett?
I think this is actually almost a perennial problem of identifying entities in different ways. And like, I don't know whether a code system's the right answer. I kind of think an organization identity that's like well-known organization identities would be good because we also because I'm thinking also we had the same discussion almost around private health insurers as well, and like it's as a list of things that are referenceable. So it's yeah, I don't know what the answer is. I'm just going to point out that I think an identifier based answer would suit me better. Like, because I think that's an option, isn't it, Ruben, to do an organization
Not really,
reference?
because there is no issuing authority for digital health services that issues identifiers for them.
Okay.
So I'm probably going to wade in here that I'm against a new code system. I'm against a new code system because for sources of digital health information, we've already started using SNOMED. We've got like My Health Record, we've got AIR, we've got like a few other things. I think we should just keep going and add these concepts in a SNOMED and then create the value set off that. I don't want a new like HL7AU managed code system for these important entities we might use in other places. Let's keep going and add them into the SNOMED set. And then it just applies across whether we're going sources for the gender identity or whether it's provenance for clinical data or whatever it is. I think that's where we need to go.
I'm very keen to hear from the terminologists on the call whether SNOMED typically defines concepts like this.
I'll have to get back to you on that one.
Noting again, we've already got it. We've used it before.
We've used it for what?
Are
you saying there are AIR concepts in SNOMED?
Yeah, it is. Australian Immunisation Register, My Health Record as an entity that can be used in this way. Yeah, they're in there. We've added them when I was at the agency. This is how we were doing ubiquitous typing of concepts rather than identifiers that could then be used, whether it's in this element or like any different model. And I think that's the best solution.
Well, look, that's new information for me. Which I guess answers the question as to whether or not there are things like this in SNOMED CTAU. And so If that is in fact the case, then yes, absolutely. I see the AIR actually sits in the registers hierarchy, which includes, a bunch of other things, including the cancer screening register. So this is awesome. So I would support what you're saying there, then, Danielle, if we define a value set and agitate to have these concepts are flagged added to SNOMED, and then the value set can be defined as including all of those.
So that'd be just like a well-known something set, right?
Oh,
there's
well,
others.
I mean, at the moment,
Right.
they're government controlled.
Yeah.
To a degree, they're
Yeah,
government either owned or operated, including like
Yeah.
PCA, because that comes through that channel. So at this point in time, including the NCSR, all of these come in because they are recognised sources of clinical information through our Australian jurisdiction. I think that's the pathway.
Yeah, I think we just need clarity of what that domain is to say. Like, these are actually entities, right? They're service providers, or they're services, actually, right? Like, that's a distinction, right? They're not organizations, they're services.
That's right. They are services.
Yeah. And there's just some clarity there, so we know.
All right, then what I will do, I will take an action to talk to the NCTS team and the CSIRO NCTS team about having these added in the next couple of months, and happy to accept the friendly amendment that we just create the value set and not the code system.
Do we need to? Can't they do that too?
No.
No, this is RSG specific.
Oh, okay. You want to do an RSG? Yeah, okay. Fair enough.
Yeah.
That's fair.
Well, hang on, that gets a bit more difficult. If all of these get added, and I know we've got a friendly amendment on not having PCA identified as a source, though it might be a good idea to identify PCA as an entity, assuming if there's ever a case we actually want to use it as an entity. So it could be a side thing rather than this.
Yeah, I think that's sort of separate to this ticket. It should be one of the identifiable services there. Yeah.
So doing an entities set, and then we'll do.
So can we just confirm new codes that would want to be added? I know we're running down to time. HI service makes sense to me. Oh, Angus, your hand's up.
On the same thing, can I ask how does it work when the source is somewhere like Queensland Health or Dr. Brown Surgery?
So I think as it's currently, as the RSG structure is currently set up, I don't know if I'm not sure. Source has has a couple of type options, but there's also a jurisdiction option in RSG too. I think unless there's a source type for a reference to an organization, you'd have to have the particular service in Queensland Health that you're getting the information from, or the document in Queensland Health you're getting it from.
Couldn't it be as granular as Brown Street Surgery or even Dr. Bob? Like
it could.
The source was him. He set them as this.
It does support an organization.
Yeah, you can use HPO. You can put the HPO in.
Practitioner. Practitioner.
So you can do all of those. So the ones we're talking about is the value codable concept incarnation of RSG.source. That's what I'm seeking a binding for. Yeah.
Which also, I mean, frankly, if people are instantiating an organization reference for like the My Health Record or AIR, we'd expect them to use the code anyway, typing that, because like who's really going to process anything with that code?
Yeah. I think it'd be good to do some explanation, because I don't think we want types of source in there. We actually want identifiable entities and stuff like that. So just we might, we could qualify that. Yeah.
All right, we're coming down to 2 minutes.
Yeah.
We haven't quite finished this, so I'm actually going to ask. I'd like to bring this back, but I know, Ruben, you're going to.
I'll make time to join a call if it gets discussed again.
All right, because I think there's a little bit more adjustment and a little bit more refinement on what you would want to do for this, and then we can come back and vote.
Yep. Cool. Can I check, is everyone comfortable that we have a value set in AU base for this? Just as a last talking point.
I'm not.
Okay.
Because if it works out the way we want, all SNOMED heavy value sets get published by the NCTS. I think it would be referenced by AU Base, but it wouldn't be authored by AU Base because we author that through the NCTS tool chain to get all the like QA fabulousness.
I think the issue I have with that is that we have other value sets defined for RSG already. And I'd much rather.
But we don't have any SNOMED heavy ones. All SNOMED value sets
it's
are
SNOMED
published
heavy
through NCTS
right now, but it may actually have other things from other code systems in the future. And I think that my biggest concern is that we actually have RSG specific value sets that we control in AU Base for this RSG adoption, and I'd rather them all be in AU Base than elsewhere. But we can discuss this in the next meeting.
We can. Publication and authoring through the NCTS pipeline should not impede HL7AU control. That isn't the agreement. It's more of an authoring tool chain and pipeline, but we can.
I think the issue is there isn't yet an agreement, a documented one between HL7 Australia and the agency.
I couldn't find the minutes. So, yeah. We need a new one anyway. We need renewed support.
Yeah. Yep.
I won't comment on that further. I know there are discussions around target operating models, standard operating procedures going forwards.
Yeah, I think some clarity and
So, being at time, we are looking for, there's an action around some of the e-requesting content with, I will, or whoever the co-chair is, will rely on probably Brett, you signalling that you've come to enough of an agreement that it's worth bringing to the next FHIR Work Group, and then we'll talk about it there. It looks like we can finish off that one around sources of RSG information in the next call, and Ruben is going to take that away and work through. I think there will also be a number of other items that haven't yet been put out to the public as we go through triage of ballot reconciliation. Those will be advised no later than 1 week from today for what the final agenda is. So that is also, I guess, a note for you, Brett, to through that conversation that you might have with e-requesting, that we do need to send out the notification at least 7 days before we have the meeting that we're going to vote on a particular issue.
Specific things, no worries.
All right, I think that brings us to the end of the meeting. What a lively discussion. Thank you, everyone, for participating. We've moved forwards. That's always great. I'll close the meeting here unless there are any other comments or questions.
Just want to thank the e-requesting folks for turning up and representing. So that's good.
Thank you.
Thanks, Danielle. Thanks, Brett.
Thanks, Danielle.
Bye-bye.
Bye.